very fun because everybody's very nice and very funny.
Well, that.
Well, what's that supposed to mean?
You two know. Now come on, tell me.
Did you ever wonder what happened to those famous kids? The child stars whose lives turned out nothing like we imagined? These were the faces we grew up with, shaping our afternoons, our weekends, our favorite scenes. What changed when the cameras stopped? And who did they become when no one was watching? You probably know his face better than his name. Peter Ostrum was Charlie Bucket, the lucky kid with the golden ticket in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. In 1971, he stepped into a chocolate wonderland, shared scenes with Gene Wilder, and became the quiet hero in one of the most magical films ever made. But then, he vanished. No follow-ups, no sequels, no child star meltdown, just one perfect performance, and then nothing. That was the mystery. How does a kid go from starring in one of the most iconic movies of all time to disappearing completely? Hollywood tried to keep him. There were offers, scripts, agents knocking. But Peter Ostrum turned them all down because he already knew something most actors take decades to learn. He did not want that life. Instead, Peter Ostrum went back to normal. He finished school. He kept a low profile. And eventually, he became a large animal veterinarian in upstate New York. That is right. While other former child actors were chasing sitcom pilots or burning out, Charlie Bucket was treating horses and cows. He never seemed bitter, never went on a talk show to reclaim his story, never milked his fame. He just lived. Even when fans tracked him down, he kept it gentle. Smiling, polite, but firm, that was then. What mattered was his life now, not the chocolate factory. He said acting was fun, but animals were a calling. And honestly, that tracks. There was always something kind, something grounded about Peter Ostrum. Even when he was staring at Candy Rivers, he looked like a kid who belonged somewhere real. Today, he only occasionally talks about the movie. He gives interviews once in a blue moon, usually to support education or veterinary outreach. And when he does, it is clear he respects what the film meant to people, but he never wanted it to define him. Peter Ostrum did the impossible. He walked out of the factory and straight into a quiet life. No spotlight, no spectacle, just something honest. And maybe that is the most magical ending of all. Jeff Cohen was Chunk in the Goonies, and that was all it took. One unforgettable role, one truffle shuffle, one ride-or-die moment in a cult classic that made him instantly iconic. He was not the cool one. He was not the leader. He was the heart. The one who cried, confessed, made you laugh, and pulled it together when it counted. He stole every scene with nerves and charm. And then, just like that, he was gone. Not in a tragic way, not in a scandalous way. He just moved on. Puberty hit hard, and Hollywood was not calling the way it used to. Jeff stepped away from acting. He went to school. He kept things quiet. And then he did something that none of his Goonies pals could have seen coming. He became a lawyer. That is right. Chunk became a partner in an entertainment law firm. He even helped negotiate deals for some of his old castmates, including Kwan's comeback. He went from child actor to the guy making sure child actors got paid and protected. Talk about a twist. Jeff Cohen said once that he realized early on the power was not in front of the camera, it was behind it. He traded lines for contracts and jokes for closing clauses, and he has been crushing it. You can still hear his voice in interviews. Still funny, still fast, still pure Chunk energy, but now he is in a blazer instead of a Hawaiian shirt. He did not run from the past. He just reframed it. He has talked fondly about the Goonies, but never like it was the only thing that mattered. He took that childhood flash of fame and turned it into a career of real substance. Jeff Cohen may have been a Goonie, but he also found his treasure. It just looked more like a courtroom than a pirate ship. And honestly, that feels like the kind of grown-up ending Mikey would be proud of. Josh Saviano played Paul Pfeiffer on The Wonder Years, nerdy, loyal, allergic to everything, and constantly worried. He was the best friend, the sounding board, the one who balanced Kevin's emotional chaos with awkward logic and oversized glasses. You saw Paul and thought, yep, that is my buddy. The Wonder Years was not flashy. It was not loud, and Josh fit it perfectly. When the show ended in 1993, most assumed Josh Saviano would keep acting. But he did not. He stepped out of the spotlight, went to college, and followed a completely different path. For years, he became the subject of one of the internet's earliest rumors, that he had grown up to become Marilyn Manson. He didn't. What he did become was a lawyer, and not just a pay-the-bills kind. A Yale-educated attorney who helped build a name in entertainment and intellectual property law. He even returned to acting briefly, appearing as a recurring character on Law & Order, SVU. And the twist? He played a lawyer. It was like Paul Pfeiffer had grown up, taken the bar exam, and walked onto set. He said acting again was fun, but law was where he belonged. He founded a company to help artists manage their careers, a far cry from 7th grade algebra. And every time someone brings up the Wonder Years, he smiles. Respectful, proud, but not stuck. Josh Saviano grew up without chasing fame. He turned childhood recognition into adult stability. And while he will always be Paul to those who watched, he is also proof that some stories take better turns off screen. He is not a rumor. He is a reminder. Being a good friend on television might just translate to a good life in the real world. And that is the kind of ending the Wonder Years would have written. Alisan Porter was not just the star of Curly Sue, she was Curly Sue. Big eyes, bigger voice, and a presence that made audiences sit up and say, "Wait, who is this kid?" In the early 1990s, she had it all. The title role in a John Hughes film, a standout debut that made her unforgettable, and the kind of charisma you usually have to grow into. But Alisan came into the spotlight already burning bright. Curly Sue was a box office hit, and for a minute it looked like the start of something huge. But then, she disappeared. Not in the tragic way. Not in the another child star lost to fame way. She stepped back, grew up, lived life. And while Hollywood moved on, Alisan Porter was building something quieter and maybe more impressive. She struggled, like many child stars do, with identity, with substance abuse, with the echoes of early fame that linger long after the applause fades. But she did something a lot of people do not. She came back. And when she did, it was not to act. It was to sing. In 2016, she auditioned for The Voice, and she won. With her voice, her strength, her story. She did not coast on nostalgia, she earned every note. On that stage, she was not Curly Sue. She was a mother, a survivor, a powerhouse with nothing to prove, but everything to give. It was not about reclaiming fame. It was about reclaiming herself. She showed the world what it looks like to grow, stumble, and rise again. It is the kind of comeback that does not feel like PR. It feels like real life. No filters, no sparkle polish, just grit and talent and a hell of a lot of heart. And if you only know her from that 90s film, you have no idea who she is now. Alisan Porter found her voice again, and this time, it is all her own. She is now a full-time singer, a mother, and a mental health advocate. She performs regularly, records music, and speaks openly about the roller coaster she rode to get here. Alisan did not become a Hollywood legend, but she became something better, someone real, someone resilient, someone who refused to let her childhood define her forever. Because sometimes the most unexpected life is the one where you choose yourself. Amanda Bynes had a face made for television and timing to match. From her earliest sketches on All That, it was clear this girl was funny. Not just kid funny, but real deal, throwaway punchline, hold the scene together funny. The Amanda Show made her a household name. What I Like About You, What a Girl Wants, and She's the Man kept her there. For a while, Amanda Bynes was not just a teen star, she was a genre. Comedy with a wink, sass with a smile, a Nickelodeon queen with a future that looked golden. And then, it broke. After a string of hit movies in the early 2000s, Amanda abruptly retired from acting in 2010. What followed was messy, public breakdowns, headlines filled with DUIs, erratic behavior, conservatorship battles, and the kind of scrutiny no one is built to survive. The internet was merciless. The paparazzi fed off her unraveling, and Amanda Bynes became another punchline in a story that used to be so full of them, only now they were aimed at her. But behind the chaos was a woman trying to get better. She went to fashion school. She studied hard. She stayed off social media. She tried, then fell, then tried again. Mental illness is not a twist ending. It is part of the plot, and Amanda lived it in public. She did not ask for the spotlight to stay on her, but when it did, she tried to find peace inside it. Her story is not about fame. It is about what fame takes, and about how someone who once made millions laugh had to fight to be taken seriously when she was hurting. Amanda Bynes is not the person she was at 13 or 23. She is someone learning how to live without an audience, and that takes more strength than any sketch ever required. As of now, Amanda has kept a low profile. She was released from her conservatorship in 2022 and continues to focus on mental health, recovery, and rebuilding her life away from the noise. Whether she returns to the screen or not, her story has already shifted, no longer tragic but human. Because sometimes the most unexpected journey is learning how to be okay when no one is watching. Danny Lloyd never wanted to be famous. He was 6 years old, cast as Danny Torrance in The Shining, and told he was doing a movie about a family living in a hotel. Stanley Kubrick famously shielded him from the horror. Danny thought he was filming a drama, and yet he delivered one of the most iconic child performances in film history. Red Rum, the tricycle, the wide, unblinking fear. Danny Lloyd made you believe in terror before he understood what it was. And then he vanished. Not in a dark Hollywood story way, but in a small, surprising way. He just did not act again. One more TV role, that was it. He left the industry, and he never looked back. He became a teacher, a father, a regular person with a very irregular childhood memory. You can watch The Shining today and still not believe that kid is not in 1,000 other films. He was that good. But Danny Lloyd decided not to chase more movies. He grew up, chose science over scripts, and started teaching biology. And when fans found him years later, he was as kind as he was surprised. Not bitter, not nostalgic, just grateful. Grateful that he got out clean and stayed that way. Today, Danny Lloyd is a college professor in Kentucky. He made a small cameo in Dr. Sleep, the 2019 sequel to The Shining, a quiet, respectful nod to his past. But he has never tried to cash in or reboot. He does not live on convention panels. He teaches biology. He lives a life completely separate from the shadowy halls of the Overlook Hotel, which might be the most unexpected ending of all. Jodie Sweetin was America's middle child. Not literally, but if you grew up on Full House, that is what she was. As Stephanie Tanner, she had the catchphrase, "How rude," the scrunchies, the sarcastic comebacks, and that classic TV arc from precocious kid to awkward tween to teen who always learned the lesson just in time. For 8 seasons, Jodie lit up the screen. Stephanie was spunky, bright, quick to speak her mind, and always the heart of the Tanner household's chaos. But the spotlight that made her famous also made things harder when it shut off. After Full House ended in 1995, Jodie Sweetin was just 13. And suddenly, there was no more set, no more schedule, no more applause. Just silence and adolescence. Like a lot of child stars, Jodie struggled with the loss of purpose, with addiction, with feeling like her best years might already be behind her. She battled meth, alcohol, and pills. She wrote a memoir, unsweetened, and laid it all out. The lies, the relapses, the rehab. It was raw, honest, and heartbreaking. Jodie did not try to spin her story. She owned it. She admitted to doing press interviews high, to living 2 lives, one public, one wrecked. And she said the quiet part out loud, that early fame does not always prepare you for real life, especially when that life gets messy, especially when the applause stops. But through it all, she kept trying. Not for fame, not for a comeback, for herself. And that is what makes her story worth watching. In 2016, she returned as Stephanie in Fuller House, and this time she did it sober, stronger, wiser. She danced on Dancing with the Stars, spoke at recovery events, and became an advocate for mental health and addiction awareness. Jodie Sweetin did not stay frozen in a sitcom past. She grew out of it and into something real. Her story is not one of perfect endings, but of second chances, and that is something we do not celebrate enough. Stephanie Tanner was tough, but Jodie Sweetin, she is even tougher. Taran Noah Smith was barely 7 years old when he became Mark Taylor, the youngest kid on Home Improvement, the quiet one with the bowl cut and too many oversized flannels. In a household full of slapstick and grunting and life lessons about masculinity, Mark was the sensitive one, the observer, the one who slowly, season by season, became more of a shadow than a spotlight. By the end of the show, Mark had gone goth, stopped smiling, and all but disappeared from major plots. And then, so did Taran. Unlike some of his co-stars, Taran Noah Smith wanted out. Fast. When Home Improvement ended in 1999, he stepped away from acting completely. No college sitcom guest spots, no film cameos, no nostalgic nods. He was done. And what came next was not what anyone expected. He sued his parents over a trust fund, married a woman 16 years older when he was just 17, started a vegan cheese company, left Hollywood completely and threw himself into sustainable farming. For years, he built houses out of recycled materials. He worked in disaster relief, taught people about permaculture. His entire identity flipped from sitcom actor to environmental advocate, and he did it without asking for attention. Taran Noah Smith never tried to be famous again. He let go of it all on purpose. And in the few interviews he has given since, he is clear. Acting was never his dream. It was just something he was pushed into, something he survived. Today, he works in education and tech support for special effects equipment. He is quiet, off the grid, grounded in a way that feels rare, especially for someone who spent their entire childhood on a studio lot. His life is not flashy, but it is full. And maybe that is the point, because sometimes the most unexpected path is the one where you leave it all behind and do something no one saw coming. Mara Wilson was not just a child star, she was the child star. Mrs. Doubtfire, Matilda, Miracle on 34th Street. She played clever, independent kids with big hearts and even bigger eyes. She was adorable, but never cloying, smart, but not smug. Her performances had depth far beyond her years. For a brief window in the mid-1990s, Mara Wilson was everywhere. And then, she was gone. Not in the tabloid sense, not in the scandal sense, just gone. Because Mara knew something that few others her age did. She did not want to keep doing this forever. She stepped away from film at age 13, said goodbye to Hollywood while most of her peers were just getting started. She went to college, wrote essays, found her voice, not in scripts, but in her own words. Mara became a writer, a speaker, and an advocate for mental health. She opened up about anxiety, OCD, grief, and what it meant to grow up in the public eye. She refused to become a cliché, and instead became something braver, honest. She writes about child stardom like someone who lived it but never let it define her. And that honesty has made her beloved all over again, but in a very different way. Today, she writes books, essays, and tweets that go viral, not because she is famous, but because she is sharp, insightful, and unafraid to speak truth. She is also a voice for queer rights, body positivity, and creative freedom. Mara Wilson's unexpected life is not a detour. It is the main road. She chose it, built it, walked it alone. Matilda was fiction. Mara Wilson is real. Jonathan Taylor Thomas was more than just a teen heartthrob, he was the teen heartthrob. In the 1990s, his face was everywhere. On the cover of every teen magazine, in the middle of every Tiger Beat poster collage, As Randy Taylor on Home Improvement, he was the smart one, the sarcastic one, the one who looked like he was always 2 steps ahead of the rest of the cast. He was Tim Allen's TV son, but he also voiced Simba in The Lion King. He was funny, sharp, a little too cool for sitcoms, and just when it seemed like he was on top of the world, he walked away. By the end of Home Improvement, Jonathan Taylor Thomas was already pulling back. He left the show before its final season, cited a need for normalcy, school, life, something beyond the cameras and crafted punchlines. He made a conscious decision not to ride the wave of fame into burnout. He was only a teenager, but he already saw what happened when child stars stayed too long at the party, and rather than coast on old charm, he chose to challenge himself in quieter ways. No reality shows, no sitcom nostalgia tours, no awkward attempts to reclaim the spotlight. Instead, he did what most celebrities fear most. He disappeared on purpose. He made a few movie appearances, Tom and Huck, Wild America, but you could tell his heart was not in it for the long haul. He turned down sequels, skipped red carpets, vanished almost deliberately. And in the process, he became the great mystery of 90s child stardom. Not a tragedy, not a scandal, just a choice. He went to college, Harvard no less, and studied philosophy, then Columbia, then abroad. And suddenly, the boy who everyone expected to be everywhere had gone nowhere, and seemed happy about it. He resurfaced now and then, directing, guest starring on Last Man Standing, reconnecting with Tim Allen. But it was always on his terms. Jonathan Taylor Thomas is not chasing fame anymore. He had it. He let it go. And instead of being pulled into the usual former child star spiral, he carved out a quiet life behind the scenes. People still ask where he is, what he is doing. The truth is, he has made that answer hard to find, and maybe that is the best legacy he could leave. Because Randy Taylor was never meant to be the forever boy on the magazine cover. He was meant to grow up, and so was Jonathan. Lisa Jakub knew what it was like to grow up on screen and grow tired of it. You probably remember her as Lydia Hillard, the oldest daughter in Mrs. Doubtfire. She had the heavy-lidded eyes, the teenage attitude, and that mix of protectiveness and heartbreak that grounded the comedy. Robin Williams was the chaos, but Lisa Jakub was the calm. She also appeared in Independence Day, another blockbuster, and for a moment, it looked like she was on track to be one of Hollywood's next big names. But Lisa Jakub had other plans. She left acting at age 22. No tabloid meltdown, no dramatic walkout. Just a quiet decision that the business was not for her anymore. She said the industry made her feel disposable, that the pressure and rejection slowly chipped away at her sense of self. She walked away from auditions and never looked back. Instead of trying to fit back into roles written for other people, she started writing her own story. She spent years learning how to be a person, not a persona. And with every page she wrote, she reclaimed a little more of herself. Hollywood had given her a voice, but stepping away let her learn how to use it. Hollywood teaches you to perform, but not how to be real. And Lisa wanted real. She stepped away from film sets and started a new life, writing, speaking, helping others. She has written 2 books, one about anxiety, one about living honestly outside the spotlight. She opened up about her lifelong struggle with panic attacks and mental health, and she did it with grace, humor, and total transparency. No shame, no spin, just truth. And that truth helped other people feel less alone. These days, Lisa Jakub is a writer, a mental wellness advocate, and the founder of Blue Mala, a community focused on mindfulness and authenticity. She teaches yoga, leads workshops, lives in Virginia with her husband, and she is happy, not in a Hollywood ending kind of way, but in the quiet, content, I chose this life kind of way. Lydia in Mrs. Doubtfire was wise beyond her years. Turns out, so was Lisa Jakub. Lark Voorhies was a teen icon long before anyone used that phrase casually. As Lisa Turtle on Saved by the Bell, she was stylish, sassy, and always one step ahead in fashion and wit. She gave the show its edge, its sparkle. Lisa was not just the rich girl, she was the smart one with bite. and Lark played her with perfect timing. She was part of that original NBC Saturday morning wave that felt like everything in the early 1990s. For a while, her future seemed bright and unstoppable. But as the years went on, things got complicated. Lark continued acting for a bit. Guest roles, small TV appearances, but then she faded from the screen. Rumors swirled. Fans noticed erratic interviews, quiet disappearances, headlines that hinted at more than just a career slump. People whispered, but no one really knew what was happening. She was struggling with her mental health, but she had not yet found the words to name it. And in an industry that rewards polish and punishes vulnerability, she became invisible. Her absence hurt more because she had once been so magnetic. And yet, she never stopped being part of the story, just one we stopped checking in on. In 2012, Lark began making news for all the wrong reasons. She gave interviews that felt disjointed, confused, and it soon came out that she was struggling with mental health, specifically schizoaffective disorder. It was heartbreaking, not because she disappeared, but because no one seemed to know how to talk about it. She was labeled, misunderstood, and for a long time, it felt like she had been written out of her own story, but she was still there and still fighting. Lark Voorhies eventually addressed her diagnosis openly. In 2020, she published a book and appeared on Dr. Oz to speak candidly about her condition. She acknowledged the pain of being excluded from the Saved by the Bell reboot, but later made a guest appearance after conversations with former castmates. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Today, Lark is still working on herself, still writing, still showing up in ways that look different than they once did, but are just as brave. Because not every unexpected life has to end in reinvention. Sometimes it is just about survival, about staying here, about being seen. And Lark Voorhies is still here. Brian Bonsall entered the world of television at just 5 years old and somehow stole the show from one of the most iconic sitcom casts in history. As Andy Keaton, the youngest addition to Family Ties, he came in late but left an impression. While Michael J. Fox's Alex was the center of attention, Brian's Andy was the fresh-faced counterbalance, a precocious kid with just the right amount of wide-eyed charm and sitcom-ready timing. He was adorable, sure, but he could also hold his own in a scene, and viewers took notice. After Family Ties, Bonsall kept working. He starred in Blank Check, one of those classic 90s kids movies where a child lives every kid's dream, accidentally scoring $1 million check and buying a mansion. He did other family-friendly fare too, TV movies, guest roles, even sci-fi with a role on Star Trek: The Next Generation. It seemed like Brian Bonsall was going to be one of the few child stars who successfully transitioned to teen stardom. But then he disappeared, and not in the quiet, graceful way some stars do. His name started appearing again, but not in the credits. In police reports, mugshots, tabloid blurbs. He was arrested multiple times in the 2000s. Assault charges, substance abuse issues, probation violations. The once boyish face from Family Ties was now plastered across "Where are they now?" articles for all the wrong reasons. Fans were stunned. How did the sweet kid with the bowl cut and wisecracks end up here? The answer, of course, is rarely simple. Brian later opened up about the struggle, the burnout, the years lost in haze. He admitted he had been using alcohol to cope, that he was angry, lost, spinning. But eventually, he found something to hold on to: music. Bonsall turned to punk rock, joining several bands and pouring himself into guitar, songwriting, and touring. It was loud, messy, cathartic, and it helped him rebuild. He has been sober for several years now. Married, a father, still performing, still creating. He may never return to acting, and that is okay. Because his story is not about revival. It is about reclamation. He took a life that veered off track and rewrote it, not to please a fan base, but to survive. Andy Keaton was the sweet, steady kid in a family full of strong personalities, and Brian Bonsall, all grown up, is finally standing on his own. Miko Hughes made a career out of creeping people out and then melting their hearts. His breakout role was as Gage in Pet Sematary, a performance so haunting it is still considered one of the most chilling in horror history. He was just 2 years old, but he played death, innocence, and evil with a conviction that seasoned actors struggle to match. The image of him in a tiny suit with a scalpel is burned into horror movie lore. But Miko Hughes was not just a horror kid. He bounced between terrifying and adorable effortlessly. One week he was haunting your dreams. The next, he was cracking jokes as Aaron on Full House, Michelle's pint-sized frenemy with a surprisingly snarky vocabulary. And then there was Kindergarten Cop. Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina. That line? That was him. It became a pop culture moment that followed him everywhere. He became the king of the one-liner, the toddler with timing, the preschooler who stole entire scenes. By the time he hit 10, Miko had done what most adult actors never manage: comedy, drama, horror, cult status. He was in Apollo 13, Mercury Rising, and Spawn. Always the same sharp energy, wide eyes, quick delivery, just enough edge. But as he grew older, the roles faded. Not because he lost talent, but because Hollywood often has no clue what to do with child actors once they age out of the cute phase. So he stepped back, quietly, gracefully. He started writing music, building a life, and eventually found his way back behind the camera instead of in front of it. In recent years, Miko Hughes has returned to the horror world, but this time as a director and producer. He worked on indie films, explored darker themes, and even leaned into the legacy of his younger self with a self-awareness most former child stars never get to embrace. He also became a regular at horror conventions and fan events, signing photos, taking selfies, talking openly about what it means to grow up in the spotlight and then keep growing after it fades. There is no bitterness, just perspective. Miko Hughes may always be remembered as the creepy toddler in the graveyard, but the man he became? A creative, grounded artist with nothing left to prove, and everything still to say. Peter Billingsley had one of the most iconic childhood roles in American film history. You can see the glasses, the BB gun, the pink bunny suit. Just hearing the words, "You'll shoot your eye out," is enough to bring it all rushing back. A Christmas Story was not just a movie, it was a tradition. And at the heart of it was Peter, wide-eyed and totally unforgettable. After that, you would think the sky was the limit. He had the look, the timing, and he already knew how to carry a film. But instead of chasing the spotlight, Peter did something very few child stars do. He stepped behind the camera. Not right away, but gradually. He took time to learn the business, and when he returned, it was not as an actor. It was as a producer, a director, a storyteller on his own terms. He worked closely with Jon Favreau, helped launch Iron Man, was involved in Elf. Quietly and consistently, he became a key figure in modern Hollywood, just not in the way people expected. And maybe that was the point. Fame as a child is not always a promise, it is a test. And Peter Billingsley passed it with quiet confidence. He has rarely acted since his Ralphie days. When he does, it is usually small roles or cameos, a nod to the past, a wink to those who remember. He does not chase nostalgia, he respects it. And that gives his story something rare: balance. Most people remember him as the kid who wanted a BB gun, but behind the scenes, he built a whole new legacy, one that does not need the spotlight to shine. The Mystery Files of Shelby Woo was a quiet revolution. A teenage girl of color solving crimes on television without needing superpowers, a makeover, or a boy to save her. Shelby Woo worked hard, harder than anyone around her. She interned at the police department. She took notes. She asked the questions no one else did, and she always found the truth. She was not flashy, she was not loud, but she was brilliant, determined, sharp as a tack. And maybe that is why her show has been so forgotten, because it did not scream for attention. It earned it. Week after week, Shelby solved mysteries that were never too scary, never too simple, but always full of human details. A stolen trophy, a hidden letter, a secret someone would do anything to keep buried. And Shelby followed the trail not with gadgets or gimmicks, but with focus, with heart. She listened, she watched, she paid attention, and she always believed that the truth was worth the risk. The show did something rare. It gave us a girl who was allowed to be serious, not snarky, not quirky, just focused and full of fire. And it did not feel forced. It felt earned. Shelby Woo showed that being smart was not a flaw, that being curious was powerful, and that being different was not something to hide. It was something to build your life around. Watching her now, you realize how badly we still need stories like this. Girls solving problems, kids being taken seriously. Mysteries that matter, not because they are dangerous, but because they are real. Shelby never needed a cape. She just needed a notepad and the guts to keep asking questions. Per Sullivan was the kind of weird you wished you could be. As Dewey on Malcolm in the Middle, he stole every scene without ever trying. He was odd, unfiltered, a little too smart, and strangely wise beyond his years. You never quite knew what he would say next, and that was the charm. In a show packed with chaos and punchlines, Dewey was the quiet chaos, the unexpected storm. And then, just like that, Eric faded into the silence. When the series ended, so did his career. Not with a bang, but with an empty space where we thought he would be. There were no major interviews, no public breakdowns, just Eric disappearing into the backdrop of real life. He made a couple of small appearances in the early 2000s, but nothing that felt like a return. And after a certain point, the world stopped asking when we would see him again. Because deep down, we knew the answer. Rumors have swirled, speculation has followed, but Eric has never stepped back into the spotlight to explain. And maybe he does not owe us that. Maybe his silence is its own kind of message, that life does not always need to be performed, that not every story gets a sequel. Sometimes the curtain falls and the actor just walks away. But there is something haunting about it, something unfinished. Because Dewey was not just a character. He was a mirror to the strange, fragile, brilliant side of being a kid. And the boy behind him? He chose something that most child stars never get. Anonymity, peace, privacy, a life off stage. Jake Lloyd's story is not just mysterious, it is tragic. You might remember him as the boy who played young Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. For a lot of kids in 1999, that was a dream come true. Star Wars was back. Lightsabers were cool again. And here was a child actor who became the face of one of the biggest movie franchises in history. But then he disappeared. And not just from film, from everything. It is easy to forget just how intense the backlash was to Phantom Menace. Critics were brutal. Star Wars fans were worse. And they did not just take their anger out on the plot or the pacing. They took it out on Jake. Imagine being only 10 years old and the entire internet is calling your performance annoying. That kind of attention breaks people. And Jake? He never recovered from it. He retired from acting just a few years later. Most of his early interviews show a kid who was clearly uncomfortable with fame. He said acting made his life a living hell. He was bullied in school. He was harassed in public. No child deserves that, especially not for doing what adults told him to do on set. Jake was not just a young actor. He was a kid who loved building things, drawing, and dreaming about space. Fame took those quiet joys away from him long before he had the words to understand why. We did not just criticize a performance, we dismantled a childhood. Years later, headlines returned, but for all the wrong reasons. Jake had been arrested, diagnosed with schizophrenia. His family released a public statement asking for privacy and explaining that he was receiving help. It was not just a case of a teen star walking away. It was a life unraveling under the weight of expectations no child should have carried. What hurts most is knowing how different this story could have been. If critics had been kinder, if fans had been more understanding, if the system had protected the kids it made famous. Jake Lloyd disappeared without saying goodbye because there was never space for him to say anything at all. We were too busy tearing him down, and when he vanished, the silence just felt like another chapter in a story we helped ruin. For a lot of people, the face of childhood was Cindy Brady. The blonde curls, the lisp, the pigtails, Susan Olsen turned what could have been a one-note character into a pop culture icon. She was the youngest Brady, but somehow always the one with the most heart. And for a few years, every living room in America knew her smile. But what happens when you grow out of the pigtails? What happens when the world only wants you to stay small, sweet, and frozen in time? The Brady Bunch was everywhere in the early 1970s. It was not just a show, it was a cultural comfort blanket. And Susan Olsen was a huge part of that. Kids saw themselves in her, parents saw their children in her. But when the show ended, Susan, like many of her co-stars, found herself trapped by the image that had made her famous. She was not Cindy Brady anymore, but nobody wanted anyone else. She took some time away from acting, tried other creative paths, graphic design, radio hosting, even political commentary. But none of it ever put her back in the spotlight the way the Brady Bunch had. And that spotlight, once so warm, became a shadow she could never fully step out of. For a while, she stayed off the radar almost entirely. No major roles, no big interviews, just silence. When she did return, it was mostly in Brady reunions or niche projects. There was no dramatic fall, no scandal, just a steady drift away from the center of attention. And maybe that is why her story feels so strange. Because in a way, she is still here, but not the way we remember. The Cindy we knew disappeared long ago, and Susan never really got to say goodbye. Jenny Kwan had that energy, the kind that made you feel like something exciting was about to happen. If you watched California Dreams in the 1990s, you remember her right away, cool, funny, and totally in control behind a microphone. She played Samantha Woo, the band's lead singer with a killer voice and even better stage presence. For a while, it looked like she might be the next big thing. The show had everything teen audiences loved: surfboards, pop music, drama, and friendship, and Jenny stood out in every single episode. She was not just there to play a part. She brought a kind of sparkle to the screen that was hard to fake. And for Asian American girls watching, seeing someone like her front and center was a big deal. She was visibility, talent, and charisma all wrapped into one. But when the series ended, the wave she was riding just crashed. Unlike her peers on shows like Saved by the Bell, Jenny did not leap from one mainstream hit to another. She kept working, voice roles, guest appearances, theater, but Hollywood was not exactly opening doors, and it is worth asking why. Because she had the chops, she had the fan base, she had the voice. Part of her journey involved moving into voice acting, where she found steady work but far less public recognition. She voiced Suki in Avatar: The Last Airbender, which earned her a whole new fan base. Still, the spotlight she had on California Dreams never quite returned. And in an industry that often forgets the people it once cheered for, Jenny Kwan became one of those names people remembered, but could not place. These days, she is still performing, still connecting with fans, and still showing up for the roles that matter. But for those who watched her in the 1990s, there is still a feeling of what happened, like she deserved more, and maybe she still will. The Busy World of Richard Scarry was one of those rare shows that made everyday life feel like an adventure. Not because it was flashy, but because it paid attention. Everything moved fast, but nothing felt rushed. The streets of Busy Town were filled with animals dressed like people, working jobs, making mistakes, saying sorry, and trying again. As a kid, that mattered more than you realized. You watched Hucklecat and Lowly Worm do everything from baking bread to learning how the post office worked. And it felt exciting, important. Like even the tiniest job had a story behind it. That was the genius of Richard Scarry. It turned the ordinary into something worth noticing. You were not just learning about the world, you were learning how to see it. To notice the mail truck, the grocery store clerk, the guy fixing the manhole. It told you that everyone mattered, even if they were just delivering apples. The animation was soft and playful, full of colors that felt like warm mornings in kindergarten. The music was cheerful but never annoying, and the characters made you feel like Busytown could be your town, just one step to the left behind your backyard fence. It was educational, sure, but never preachy. It explained the world without making it feel boring. And more than anything, it gave you the feeling that growing up might actually be kind of fun. Like there was a place for you in it, a job to do, a story to be part of. You did not just watch it, you lived in it for a few minutes at a time. And honestly, that was enough. Mike Vitar was the kind of kid who made every summer feel like it could last forever. As Benny the Jet Rodriguez in The Sandlot, he was a symbol of speed, freedom, and the unbreakable magic of childhood friendship. And in the Mighty Ducks sequels, he brought that same fire to the ice. He was not just playing characters, he was becoming memories, the kind that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. But somewhere between the bases and the blue lines, Mike disappeared. There was no farewell press tour, no dramatic scandal, just a quiet exit in the late 1990s, as if he had run the bases one last time and never looked back. While the world was still quoting his lines and wearing Sandlot t-shirts, Mike was stepping into a new uniform, one that would define the rest of his life. He became a firefighter, a real one, not a role, not a scene, a life-risking, people-saving, dawn-to-dusk kind of job. It is the kind of pivot that tells you something about who he truly was. Fame might have found him, but it never changed him. And while the industry kept calling, Mike had already answered a different kind of call. There is something poetic about that. A child star walking away not out of failure, but out of purpose. He did not want to be remembered. He wanted to matter. And maybe that is why his disappearance feels less like a loss and more like a story we were lucky to witness, even if only for a while. Because some heroes do not wear costumes on screen. Some wear helmets and carry hoses. For a few years in the late 1990s, Rachael Leigh Cook was everywhere. She's all that made her the face of teen romance, the poster child for the unnoticed girl becomes the star story. And she nailed it. That performance became iconic. People quoted it, parodied it, fell in love with it, and then she just drifted out of the spotlight. Unlike some stars, Rachael Leigh Cook did not crash. She just coasted. She kept working, yes, but the roles got quieter, smaller, less central. She went from red carpets and press tours to voice work and cable movies. And through it all, fans kept wondering, why did she disappear? There was no scandal, no public meltdown. Rachael always came across as grounded, almost too normal for the chaos of late 90s Hollywood. Maybe that is why she never played the fame game the way others did. She did not date for headlines. She did not chase big franchises. She just did the work. Until the work changed. She has spoken in interviews about how she felt boxed in by her early success, how people could not see her as anything but Laney Boggs, and how hard it is to be taken seriously when your most famous scene involves a slow-motion staircase and a makeover. In recent years, she has made something of a quiet return. Hallmark movies, indie projects, even producing. But it is clear she is doing it on her own terms now. Still, when people think of her, they think of that one perfect moment in a teen movie that defined a decade. And maybe that is part of why her disappearance felt so strange. She was so big, so fast, and then she was gone. There is something melancholy about it. A sense that she had more to give, more stories to tell. But Hollywood moved on, and so did she. When the final song plays at the end of She's All That, you can almost feel the closing of a chapter, not just in the movie, but in Rachael Leigh Cook's career. No loud goodbye, no closing credits for real life, just a slow fade to quiet. You might not remember his name, but you definitely remember his face. Mason Reese was everywhere in the 1970s. That unmistakable voice, that red hair, those quirky expressions. He was not just a child actor, he was a phenomenon. Not from sitcoms or movies, but from television commercials. He sold peanut butter, fast food, breakfast cereal, you name it. He was a commercial darling, and for a short while he had the country wrapped around his little finger. He was not the kind of famous that came from scripts. He was the kind of famous that lived between Saturday morning cartoons. There was something magnetic about him, like he knew how to grab your attention without even trying. In just seconds, he made you laugh or smile or want whatever he was selling. And then just like that, the commercials stopped, and so did the attention. Unlike most child stars, Mason did not come from a hit show or a beloved series. He came from 30-second spots that aired in millions of homes every day. And somehow, that made him even more familiar. You did not watch Mason once a week. You saw him every time you turned on the television. He had that rare charisma that made advertisers compete for his time. But then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. As he grew older, the roles dried up. The charm that worked at 6 years old did not work at 16. And Mason, like so many others, had to face a world that no longer knew what to do with him. He left the screen and stepped into business, opening restaurants in New York and dabbling in media work behind the scenes. He stayed active, but quietly. No more cereal spots, no more endorsements, just a different kind of life. People would ask, "Hey, whatever happened to that peanut butter kid?" And there would be no easy answer, because Mason Reese did not crash. He just faded. Fame is loud, but obscurity is quieter than we ever expect. His story is not one of tragedy or scandal, but it is one of vanishing. He did not leave with a curtain call. He just stopped being seen. And when you think about how much joy he brought into living rooms across the country, it feels like someone we all should have thanked. Lisa Bonet was not like the others. Even in the carefully curated world of 1980s television, she stood out without even trying. Her character on The Cosby Show, Denise Huxtable, was stylish, unpredictable, artistic, and so clearly not acting. It was as if Lisa Bonet had just stepped into the role by being herself. Her presence felt real, wild in a quiet way, and everyone watching knew it. By the time she was cast in A Different World, it felt like her star was still rising. She had that rare thing, coolness that could not be copied. She wore what she wanted, said what she meant, and played characters that did not fit the mold. But Hollywood never quite knew what to do with someone like Lisa. She refused to shrink herself to fit expectations, and it made her unforgettable. Even when the screen stopped showing her face, her influence kept echoing in style, tone, and voice. Her off-screen life made headlines, marrying Lenny Kravitz, speaking her mind, choosing work that was bold and offbeat. She refused to play the game, and the industry did not take kindly to that. There were conflicts behind the scenes, rumors of creative tension, alleged disagreements with the show's producers. She was quietly written out of A Different World, and her appearances on The Cosby Show dwindled. By the early 1990s, Lisa Bonet was no longer on primetime television. For someone who had once seemed unstoppable, it was a strange and sudden drop-off. But here is the thing. Lisa Bonet never really disappeared. She just stopped showing up where people expected her to. She chose independent films over network sitcoms. She picked privacy over public approval. And while the world kept asking, where did she go? She was living, raising her children, being who she had always been. In a way, she vanished from the spotlight, but not from meaning. Her impact lasted far beyond her screen time. And for many of us, she will always be Denise, the one who dared to be different and walked away on her own terms. Bug Juice did something most kids' shows would never dare. It showed you the truth, without a script, without a filter, and without anyone pretending to be cooler than they were. This was not a drama, it was a diary. A real, raw look at summer camp life through the eyes of actual kids, not actors. And that alone made it hit different. You saw awkward first crushes, real arguments, teary-eyed letters home. It was messy, it was uncomfortable, but it was honest. Bug Juice never tried to dress up the truth. If a kid cried, they cried. If a kid felt left out, the camera stayed on them. And for some reason, that mattered more than any special effects or laugh tracks. It was reality television before the term got poisoned. You watched because it felt like someone finally understood how complicated summer could be, how it was not just campfires and singing songs. It was the first time you ever felt homesick. The first time you realized friendships could hurt. And maybe the first time you looked around and thought, I do not know who I am yet. Bug juice did not fix those feelings. It just showed you that you were not the only one having them. Mara Wilson did not just play magical girls, she was one. To anyone growing up in the 90s, she was the bright-eyed child who brought life to characters we adored. Whether she was teaching a cruel headmistress a lesson in Matilda or navigating grief in Mrs. Doubtfire, Mara had a presence that was impossible to ignore. She had a warmth that could cut through any screen and land softly in your heart. And then, almost overnight, she was gone. Not fallen, not broken, just elsewhere. As it turns out, Hollywood was not the sanctuary it pretended to be. Mara's decision to leave was not sudden, but it was necessary. The industry that once celebrated her began to suffocate her. By the time she was a teenager, acting felt more like a performance off-screen than on. She was growing up in a space that did not allow her to grow. So she walked away. From the lights, the scripts, the expectations, and toward something truer. Mara became a writer, an advocate, a voice for children who never had one. She opened up about mental health, grief, and what it meant to be a child star when the cameras stopped rolling. And while we lost her as an actress, we gained her as a witness to a world most of us never see. The one behind the curtain, the one without the glitter. Her words became a new kind of performance, honest, brave, and often heartbreaking. Some child stars fade because the world forgets them. Mara chose to disappear because she remembered herself, and in doing so, she showed us that there is life after the applause ends, a life of purpose, of survival, of healing. That might be the greatest role she has ever played. If you grew up in the 1990s, Courtland Mead was impossible to miss. He had a look, a voice, a style that made him stand out even in the most chaotic kid movies. You saw him in The Little Rascals with that bowl cut and gap-toothed grin. He played Danny Torrance in the 1997 miniseries of The Shining. He was even the weird kid with the beanie in The Faculty. Courtland was everywhere. Cartoons, live action, Disney Channel appearances. But then something happened. Or maybe nothing happened. He just stopped. There was no dramatic news story, no scandal to point to. Just a slow fade from the screen. 1 minute he was booking major roles, and the next he was gone. And for a lot of fans, the realization came years too late. He had been part of so many movies that shaped childhoods, but because he was always cast as the quirky one, he never got the big lead, never got the major breakout moment. He was the scene stealer, not the headline, and maybe that is why his disappearance went so unnoticed. Courtland's last major credits came in the early 2000s. A voice here, a cameo there, and then silence. No official goodbye, no press statement. In later interviews, he spoke about feeling disillusioned with the industry, about how hard it was to find meaningful roles as he grew older, how being a child star sometimes feels like an expiration date you never agreed to. There is something bittersweet about watching him now in old reruns, because you can see the charm, you can see the talent. He was funny in a way that felt unforced, natural. But like so many others, he got older, and Hollywood looked away. No controversy, no bad behavior, just a system that moves on faster than it should. And in a way, his exit feels like the story of dozens of child actors who gave us everything in our youth and then had nowhere to go next. Courtland Mead may not have had the loudest career, but he had one that mattered, and his sudden disappearance, quiet, complete, feels like the kind of loss you only notice when the movie ends and the room gets too quiet. Bobby Brady was the youngest brother, the curious one, the kid with the mischief in his eyes. And for a lot of families in the 1970s, Mike Lookinland was Bobby. He brought something real to the screen. A little awkward, a little wild, and completely lovable. But like so many others from the Brady Bunch, Mike found himself stuck in a role that never aged with him. Once the show ended, so did the version of him that most of America remembered. There is something bittersweet about being everyone's little brother, and then suddenly not being seen at all. Audiences remember the smile, the one-liners, the striped shirts, but they rarely stop to ask what came after. For Mike, Life after Bobby was not a crash. It was more like slowly disappearing behind a closed door. The world kept watching reruns, but Mike had already stepped away. He tried to keep working in entertainment, but it was never the same. His look changed, his voice changed, and the roles stopped coming. That is how it goes with child stars. Hollywood knows how to cast them, but not how to keep them. Mike quietly slipped behind the camera, taking on work in production and cinematography, jobs that did not ask him to smile or say a catchphrase. He had to rebuild his identity from scratch. But it was not easy. Fame leaves a mark. And when your whole childhood is on tape, it is hard to grow up without everyone watching. Mike battled alcohol addiction in his adult years, facing down the silence that comes when fame fades, but the pressure stays. He eventually got clean, moved to Utah, and focused on family life. But you could always tell there was a part of him still connected to that little boy in the striped shirt. He popped up now and then for Brady reunions, always with that same gentle demeanor, always polite. But you could see it in his eyes. He was someone who had moved on long ago, someone who had disappeared on purpose. And maybe that is the quiet strength of his story. He did not fall apart. He just walked away without saying goodbye. Fame fades, but stories grow. So tell us your favorite. Hit like if one surprised you, and subscribe for more journeys that start in childhood and end somewhere you never expected.